Welcome to another episode of Sustainable Goat. I'm Steve Cassingham, and I interview the greatest of all time in sustainability from the past, present, and into the future. If you're thinking about growing a startup, most of the time you need investment money. And when it comes to investors, there are so many out there, some that just want to see a return on their investment, others that genuinely believe in the idea. David Fox is definitely the latter. He is an incredible guy and has been investing for over 20 years in innovative startup companies, whether they're seed stage or early stage startups, and he's been able to see them grow and thrive. And in his own life, he's been trying to live as sustainable of a life as possible. So let's dive right in and we'll chat with David Fox. Hey, David, how you doing?
Great. Good to meet and talk.
Yeah, great to have you on the podcast. I just figured let's start with, kind of a little bit about who you are and where'd you grow up? Obviously, I don't think you're American, judging by the accent.
You are right there. I grew up in Sydney, Australia. I moved here in the mid-90s. But yeah, Sydney, suburban. One of the things that we had, though, we backed onto a wonderful reserve. So I spent a lot of time outside the house. And when I was about 10 years old or so, I started growing a wonderful vegetable garden.
Really?
And, that got my hands in the dirt as hands in the soil as a young kid.
What kind of sparked that?
It was funny. My parents had started a retail business, and just nearby there was a gardening store, and I used to wander down there. I was 10 years old, and so wandered down there and used to chat with this wonderful lady who ran that, and that got my interest going.
What was the first few things you grew?
Oh gosh, potatoes and carrots and corn and beans, and it was just a whole raft of things.
How did it go? Did you find you had a green thumb out of the gate, or was it a little bit more difficult to learn that side?
I grew enough that it was more than enough for what we would eat at home, and I started selling the produce to neighbors and folks around the neighborhood, and that actually got my entrepreneurialism going when I was still, I guess, 11 or 12 years old.
Wow. So you definitely started at a young age, kind of going down that entrepreneurial route. That's awesome.
Yeah.
How did that kind of evolve into, where you're at now? I mean, obviously we don't have to fast forward to where we are now quite yet, but I'd just love to hear how, that kind of entrepreneurial spirit continued to develop through, school, and then how eventually you ended up moving to the States. What was that kind of like?
Well, my parents, the business they started was a backpacking, trekking, traveling retail store. So kind of like a REI or Patagonia kind of store. And so I got to meet a lot of folks who were spending a lot of time in the outdoors and traveling around the world. I was always a bit of a fan also of sort of the new things. I'm sure I was the first kid in my whole school who had a pocket calculator. I was the first kid who was making Super 8 movies and had a waterproof camera. I was really into surfing, and I was taking photos out in the surf. So I was sort of always lent towards the new thing.
When did you start, professionally? What was your kind of life like? Did you do like the college route? Did you go a different route? What did that kind of look like?
It was a very different route. At that time in Australia, it wasn't unusual for kids to leave school in year 10. Actually, typically they'd go and get a trade. And I actually went into the retail business. I was not quite 16 and went into the family business. And that was it for school.
Did you like working for the family business?
Oh, it was a great experience. Really enjoyed working with my folks, and really took that business a long way in a few short years.
Wow. So what brought you to the States? What was the intrigue, the interest?
Well, it's interesting. One of the things with building that business out is I helped a couple of physiotherapists design a backpack for school kids, and we started selling that backpack. And I wanted to get it out to schools across the country, and there being thousands of those, I had to figure out how to market to those schools. And so I was looking at computer systems to build that database and get the word out about this incredible backpack. And along the way, I just sort of got so involved with the computers, I started importing software, and that turned into a software distribution business. So I ended up representing Adobe and many other companies in Australia in the mid 80s through early 90s. That brought me across to America a couple of times a year. Yeah, I was sort of back and forth here over many years. And eventually in 94, I moved here to start an internet business. That was sort of the next opportunity I was seeing evolving, and started a digital commerce uh, business in the mid 90s.
And what was that like back in the day? Because I mean, when you think about e-commerce now, I mean, you can pop up a store on Shopify and a couple hours and be selling products. What was that process like back in the 90s?
It was a very different process there. Yes, everything, every element had to be built all the way. I think of one thing, just like SSL, the securing, the system that gives you secure pages. We actually had to buy a physical certificate and then type that number in. It was an $800 product to buy an SSL. Today it's just you turn on SSL and it's just there natively. But that was an $800 product. I just
Oh
remember
my
the
gosh.
guys dropped off the box to us. So yes, very different time. The connectivity was so much slower. The idea of running video and audio uh, wasn't there. Web pages were incredibly simple. So yeah, very
Wow.
different today, and very different in terms of the support in starting a company. And today we've got a whole raft of accelerators and incubator programs that give founders a terrific boost. So having moved here, I had a small network, but not the kind of network that comes out of, if you've gone to a major college. I think there's a huge advantage of being local and having that college-based network.
So, I mean, you've kind of had an interest in technology and how it kind of relates to, what we do day to day as human beings. And I think kind of you've been able to bridge that gap to where, you've been on the product side, but also the software side. Because I think sometimes when you're siloed into one area, you don't see that whole picture. And I think, I mean, that's where I see a lot of fascination in what you do. What kind of sparked that fascination? I mean, I know it was a little bit of, needing that software and the distribution of the backpack, but what kind of continued that growth of love for technology?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I just always had a real interest in how ideas are propagated. The company that I started here was actually called Knowledge Web, and the idea of making expert systems available to folks more broadly than just having them being siloed with experts, to make them more available. I guess one of the things I remember back to as a kid, there was a set of coffee table books that folks had called from of Leonardo da Vinci. I just remember sort of reading through those books and learning about his life and his incredible work. That was sort of one of those influential things I remember.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, when it comes to, sports, being outdoors, you're also an active surfer, if
Yeah.
I remember right. When did you start surfing?
Oh gosh, that was definitely single digit age. And that was the thing I loved to do as a kid, and still love to do today. Yeah, that is definitely my outdoor activity, and the one place that I am completely disconnected, because the rest of my life I've got a wearable tracking me. I've got a phone in my pocket always. I'm standing in front of a computer all day. But one thing I don't have is a waterproof watch. I don't have an Apple Watch. It's one piece of technology I don't have, so I can stay disconnected in that one place out in the surf.
That's awesome. So I'd imagine, I mean, you probably just grew up with an appreciation for the ocean and kind of just the power that it has, and all the different benefits it has for our world. I'd imagine you've been kind of immersed in that a bit.
Yeah. Actually, it was probably one of the areas, along with the backpacking business, the areas that got me interested in sort of this green, sustainable, regenerative world. As a surfer, you want to surf in clean water. Um, there was certainly a culture in surfing of back to the earth, especially back in the 70s, sort of a back to the earth movement. I always used to shop in, it was funny, so many places I'd go surfing nearby, there would be a health food store, some sort of healthy food and surfing lifestyle kind of melded together. So yeah, sort of something. Definitely, the surfing is one of the areas that had a big influence on my life.
Yeah, and so now you're an active investor in a lot of things. So I'd love to just hear a little bit about, what are some of the things that fascinate you that you invest in, and then also on the sustainability side, we'll get into a little bit later. But you've built a great house that is LEED certified. So I'd just love to hear from like the investing side. Where did that kind of start, and what's kind of been your focus?
It was interesting. One of the events, I sold my company in '99, and it was sort of started looking around for that next thing to do. And there's a couple of sides of investing. One is just sort of where does your money sleep at night? And so I have money in organizations like RSF Bank, C Note, Force for Good Fund, and Crowdfund Main Street. And so the sort of investing I've done like that. And then there's certainly companies that I've invested in. Preserve Farm Kitchen up in Sonoma, that's bottling and jarring produce. So it's sort of been quite a range of ways I've been able to sort of put my money behind projects that I believe in.
Yeah, yeah. And when it comes to investing in sustainability, what's that world like? Because especially when I grew up in the Silicon Valley-ish area, in Santa Cruz, and there's always so much money going around. Everything's focused on technology, and more so when I was younger, apps and everything like that. How does that differ in the sustainability side? Because I think it's a little bit of an uphill battle in a lot of cases, to where your market fit isn't necessarily there, but I think it's starting to kind of come around. So what's that journey been like from investing in sustainable products, kind of earlier versus now?
Well, very, very. One of the things that's really changed is the what's called the Jobs Act that enabled crowdfunding. So investing in companies, individual private companies, has really been limited unless you have $1 million of net worth outside your home, or you're making $200,000 a year of income, uh, and you're then what's called an accredited investor, and then you're able to invest in startup companies. But outside of that, startup funding has really been restricted. So in 2012, Obama pushed through the Jobs Act that enabled regulation crowdfunding. So you've got sites like Weed Funder and Seed Invest where you can actually, as a regular individual, invest in startup companies. Crowdfund Main Street is one that's working with local companies in the Bay Area to help them bring their sort of the constituents together, their audience, and people who believe in a local restaurant or a local ice cream company can actually invest and back that company.
That's super cool. I think opening up those opportunities for people to invest in what they believe in, I think also kind of gets an active investor base that really wants to see the success of a product, whereas they maybe not have known about it if they weren't looking for any types of investments. Do you remember your first investment in a sustainable company or a product?
Yeah, well, actually, the first real investment I did was actually in a non-profit, which was the Biomimicry Institute, something that was really furthering the work of Janine Benius and in that field of biomimicry. This sort of idea of innovation inspired by nature. The first commercial company a few years ago was Preserve Farm Kitchen. Wonderful founder who, one of the challenges for farmers is that when they have a lot of produce is when they're also earning the least money for it. And sadly, a lot of produce ends up getting plowed back into the soil. Being able to preserve that food, put it in a jar, put it in a can, is something has moved up to sort of very large scale. And what Preserve Farm Kitchen's working to do is work at a smaller scale, so that farmers can work locally and earn a bit more out of that produce. So that was an interesting one 5 years ago.
When it comes to these solutions that we can have from a sustainability standpoint, I think, it's difficult. You have all these different factors that are coming into play. You have, the fact that there's a lot more people to feed. You have a lot more of a ability to grow locally. But at the same time, you have a lot of farmers who they need to offload that produce. They need to get it somewhere. They need, to really make their growth sustainable. And also when it comes to the soil and the biodiversity of the soil that they're growing their produce on. I mean, I think I read a fact that said that, if you get an average like tomato, it has about a quarter of the benefit that it used to in the 50s based on the soil.
And it's probably been transported 1,000 miles, a term called food miles. So yeah, sadly, far too much of our produce is shipped far too far. So that's one of the things I like to do personally, is just supporting farmers markets.
Yeah, yeah. How do you try and live a sustainable life as a person day to
Well, I
day?
think I think the sort of first thing is staying healthy. If you're healthy, you can do more. You can there's just more you can do with life. So for me, staying healthy is looking at what the food that I've got in my pantry and where that comes from. So because of farmers markets, I love supporting local co-ops wherever I can. Online, there's like Thrive has an incredible array of great food. So so it's the food, obviously exercise. So surfing inspires me to stay fit, and also it's just sort of where my money sleeps at night, and sort of putting sort of the mental side of sort of having money in good projects and good places.
And you mentioned that the home that you live in is LEED certified. What kind of was that decision? So you decided you're gonna build a home. So
Yeah, it
what?
was actually it's a home in the past, previous marriage. Uh, we we bought a Queen Anne Victorian in the Haight Ashbury in 2008, and said it. There was a little. We started as a small remodeling project, as many of them do, and ended up becoming a 2.5 year project that we did get a LEED certification on, actually a LEED Platinum certification. That was quite an incredible project to do. I learned a lot about green building. Yeah, the result in the end of the home was quite incredible. It is a lot of work, especially a Queen Anne, a house built in the 1890s. It was a tremendous amount of work, and I guess that's one of the. I've invested in a company called Blockable, that's building sustainable homes fresh and out of a factory. And I think there's just a lot to be said for actually for factory built new homes. There's only about, I think, about 400 Queen Anne homes left in San Francisco. So there's a lot to be said for preservation. On the other hand, it was 2.5 years of horrible disturbance to neighbors having builders come and go. So I think in a lot of situations, it's better to replace than repair.
What was kind of the hard hurdles that you had to get over when doing that renovation and really trying to bring in a green builder into such an old building?
Well, yeah, the lead builder was great. He had some education on it. He was really enthusiastic about the idea. We had a large rainwater storage system that we wanted to do, and we were actually lucky. We were the first permitted under some new water recycling rulings. But yeah, that was just having the city cooperate. Again, I think that's become easier in the past 10 years. We actually just in the home I'm presently in, we moved here 6 months ago. We put solar on, and that was just incredibly easy. Not only was it a fraction of the cost of solar back then, but the process, it was a 1 day install.
So what do you think is the future of sustainable building? I mean, I think it's kind of one of those areas where there's so much room to grow. I know there's a lot of research going into materials specifically, just material development and then how we actually construct our structures. What do you think the future of sustainability is when it comes to actually building? 'Cause, when we live in a home, it's your space, it's where we spend a lot of our time, and they're important. And I think now the focus is starting to shift that way, but it's also how can we do it differently?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I would underscore for people, is ventilation. One of the things about green building is really building a tight envelope. So there's, you don't have air leakage. The original Queen Anne Victorian, we didn't have to have any sort of, you didn't have to think about getting fresh air into the house. It was so leaky. But these new buildings are built very tight, and so you can actually end up with terrible indoor air quality. Build it tight, vent it right is one of the things we used to say.
That's awesome. So, I mean, what do you think are going to be those changes that are going to be coming in like 5, 10 years? I mean, there's so many exciting things going on in the building space. You have a lot of manufactured homes where, now those are almost the things that people want rather than it used to be, we want the custom build where they bring the materials in and all this stuff. And now they're being built in factories quicker, more affordable, but also really efficient and clean. So where do you kind of see that market going over
Oh,
over time?
that's absolutely the area I favor. But
Yeah.
again, having gone through this multi-year process of renovation, and again, there's something to be said for preserving beautiful old buildings. But in general, I'm a huge fan of the move towards manufactured homes. A manufactured home, not in the old sense of very flimsily built things that were you sort of think of those temporary school buildings. The thing with building in a factory is precision. Like you think about building an automobile these days. Automobiles come off a production line out of an incredible factory. They're consistent. They work. They're efficient. Trying to do that is like, just imagine trying to assemble a car on your driveway. Yeah, sort of the whole
Mhm.
idea that you would assemble. You would get you'd get the thousands of parts that go into a car and assemble it in a driveway in the rain with people coming and going, and it's just ridiculous. This sort of build on site process is just so inefficient. So, but it's an industry that takes a long time to shift. But I think we're starting to see that companies, like I said, I invested in Blockable as one company that's doing this. There's a couple of dozen companies that are working on really well designed homes for people that are efficiently built in factories. So that these houses have the potential to not only be lower cost, but to be better designed and longer lasting.
Yeah, and as an investor, what are you really looking for when you're trying to invest in something that's newer like this? I mean, Blockable is, they're a company that's doing great things and really cool things, but also, the market hasn't adopted this methodology yet. So what does that kind of look like as you invest in more seed rounds on these companies? What are you really trying to look for?
Well, it's definitely risky. It's an interesting confluence of things, particularly in an early stage company, really looking at the founder and the passion and the sort of where that founder is coming from. Looking at other investors who are supporting it. In the case of Blockable, I got access to that company through a syndicate, which is another innovation in company in financing companies. So it was a syndicate started by a gentleman named Jason Calacanis. That what he does is he brings together in that case, I think a couple of hundred investors under his umbrella to make what becomes a single investment into a company like Blockable. One of the challenges with getting into with investing in early stage companies is it's often a minimum of a $25,000 or $50,000 check that you've got to write. So the syndicates are enabling people for as little as $1,000 to gain access to these companies and to support these companies.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think when you're looking to invest in companies, I mean, it's almost like you bet on the jockey, not the horse.
Certainly early on, because that person's got to be able to, first of all, raise funding for the company. They've got to be able to bring other people in to work in the company. They've got to be able to sell the products of the company. And all of that takes a special kind of personality to be able to do that. So being a great storyteller, being a great organizer. Often you see these companies actually have 2 or 3 founders because it's really hard to find all of these qualities in a single person.
And what have been some of your exciting investments that you either have made or just you're really excited about? Because I think people look at investment as, just I'm going to throw my money at something and see where it goes. But I think that, when you partner with an investor in a venture, it's a partnership. You're really trying to learn from each other, grow, and really push things to the next level in such a way where you're not just, throw money at it to fix the problem kind of thing.
Yeah, well, there's a few ways that I look at it. Investing early stage in companies is something that you want to do with money that you won't miss if it never comes back. When you make an investment in a private company, it's unlike putting money in. If you put money into the stock market, into shares of a public company, if you need that money back, you can get it back tomorrow. Maybe you'll lose a bit. It's unusual for companies to completely go out of business. It usually takes quite some time. And so there's liquidity and stability and knowledge about the company and public market investing, and you can do it for a few dollars. When you invest in a private company, the money is locked up for as long as the company until the company has a liquidity event, which could be 5 years, could be 10 years, could be longer. My earliest investment was 20 years ago. My very first early stage investment went to zero in a year. The next one is still alive, but it's 20 years later. These are very risky and illiquid. It's interesting how I see different things. Generally, it's if I'm making a direct investment in a company, it's because I've had a personal introduction. I've met the founder, or I've been introduced to the founder by someone else. So it's still most of the sort of the direct investments in companies I make. It's very much a person to person kind of thing, and that's where it's usually that's sort of that 5-figure check. Smaller investments, though, there's syndicates. So Angel List is one. WeFunder is another. These are enabling much smaller investments to be made. So Angel List is still for accredited investors. So you have to have that $1 million in net worth or the $200,000 income. But those investments can be as small as $1,000. And I've actually done over 30 of those now. How do you find these companies? One, I'm just thinking of one called Fresh Bowl that's making wonderful food in a jar. And I was at Chicago Airport hunting for something decent to eat last year. And there was this vending machine with these glass jar and in it some healthy food. And I sat on the plane and super enjoyed it. And so when that company popped up on Angel List, I instantly pressed the button and invested. A few years prior to that, Kettle and Fire was making bone broth. Was introduced to me by someone I'd met, and it's amazing when I was just in the supermarket the other day, and you sort of walk along there, and I'd say to my daughter, "Hey, I invested in that company." It is a sort of a fun thing to do when you actually see a company product that you've invested in, and you see it on the shelves. It's a good feeling. Right? My advice to people is do it with money that if it never comes back, you won't miss it.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't put all the money in there and, make that be the only source of success. Probably isn't
Indeed.
the best way to do it. Cause yeah, a lot of startups do end up failing and it's not necessarily, it could be a whole host of reasons. Product market fit is obviously a huge one. And I think, we're challenging ourselves and more out of necessity nowadays that we have to challenge the way that we live our lives and the way and the products that we buy and the way that we source them. As an investor, what do you think is kind of needed in order to grow that space? Because, these business ideas and everything when it comes to sustainability are great, but all of them take money and they have to raise money from somewhere in order to get their, dream to become a reality. So what do you think is needed from like an investor standpoint in order for us to get there for sustainability specifically?
The world is moving in this direction. Even giant firms like BlackRock have environmental, social, governance, ESG funds now. So it's sort of moving of a whole industry. It's a shifting of mindset. I think it's going to be interesting to see what comes out of this COVID coronavirus time. People are really reevaluating their health and their lives. Of course, we've got incredibly existential problem in climate change ahead, and hope that people will heed the message that's come out of coronavirus about the impact that can such small things can have. You think about a virus, it's a microscopic thing that has shifted the world.
How does that work from when you have a market that is slowly starting to emerge? Is it purely company? Do you focus on, hey, I want to go after just companies that are focused on reusing microplastics? I mean, do you choose like a specialty, or is it kind of just, what it looks like on the financial side? How does that process work?
One of the things I've done is invest in a small venture fund, called Safer Made, and they're bringing safer products and technologies to market that have a chance, have a potential to change whole sectors. And so, backing a fund like that, they look at hundreds of companies, invest in a handful, and so that's I've sort of taken a portion of my money and put it into that venture fund, because those guys are much smarter than me in being able to figure out which companies to back. So that's one way to do it. Is again, if you're an accredited investor, investing in a fund that's focused in this area. The other way is is investing through the syndicates, and doing it on a company by company basis, but doing it with small amounts of money, investing across a range. I think that's one of the things I've really it's really shifted for me. Is 10 years ago, the only way to invest was to put down a $25,000 or $50,000 check directly into a company. But the notion of being able to spread that across many companies through a platform like AngelList or sort of shifted the way that I'm investing, and so I'm sort of spreading it around a lot more. And then for regular folks who aren't accredited investors, something like WeFund, Seed Invest, and any of the other equity crowdfunding platforms give you an opportunity even for a few $100s to invest in an early stage company.
I mean, it's incredible to see how much money can be raised from a community that wants to back it versus, you're having to chase down investors that are already getting chased down by, hundreds of other people saying, hey, I want your money, and being chosen for that. Whereas they're going, hey, we'll let the market kind of come to us, and we're just going to focus on building a good product. And so what do you think the future of sustainability is over the next 5 years? Just as someone who does actively invest, but as just looking at the market in general, I mean, you surf, you're outdoors all the time, started in backpacks. I mean, it's such a appreciation for nature. I mean, where do you see sustainability and the focus of it really going over the next 5 years?
At a personal level, I've actually got very interested in the health tech market. So I think sort of health of people has become incredibly important. And of course, as climate change brings more tropical diseases to more places, makes it harder to live in places. I think there's the coming change in climate is going to have some really negative impacts on people's health. So that's sort of one area. I think one of the fields that is so important is this area I mentioned early on of biomimicry, a sort of notion of innovation inspired by nature. I think that's they had a design challenge program last week. My partner was a judge in, and the 9 companies that presented were just really it was a really great range of companies. So I'm sort of seeing companies that are more, and again, I think one of those things I mentioned early on, the accelerators and the incubator programs, I think are really being helpful to founders to be able to pitch and present their company in a way that's attractive to investors, and where they're not seen just simply as a donation, but actually as an investment, as an investable company.
Things are just going to be continuing to shift, and I think just having those opportunities for companies to really drive that change is going to be really important in the future. So I think it's definitely an exciting time for that. And do you remember the first sustainable product that you purchased, whether it was either sustainably made or would help you live a more sustainable life?
Oh, it would be food of some sort. Yeah, I definitely go straight to the food side. There's definitely an organic, natural food person from early on. I don't know what particular food it would have been, but I definitely food comes to mind.
Definitely the food. I mean, I think you were kind of doing that from the single digits in the first garden. So, and then what can people do in whether they're looking to invest their money or purchase things differently, or even just to create a product if they want to start a business or anything like that. What can somebody do as a first step to kind of live a more sustainable life? I think a lot of people are stuck in that mindset that, they have to sell pretty much everything they own and not consume anything. So what can people do is just like a simple step that, I think could have a bigger impact.
Well, I think it all comes from being mindful and just sort of thinking before buying. We're driven by so much marketing, messaging. I think just continually being mindful. I think of the little tiny things, carrying my own shopping bags in my car, so I'm not taking paper bags out of a. Yeah, I think it's just little, being active day to day.
Yeah, probably maybe even having a little home garden or even an indoor garden, anything like that.
Yeah, having a good partner is one. I've got a wonderful partner who's planted a great garden here at our new home, and we've got a dozen and a half fruit trees, and we've got all sorts of produce, half a dozen different varieties of tomatoes starting to give off their fruit, and squashes and things. Yeah, definitely a home garden, but it's awesome when you've got a partner who can do the hard work.
Definitely, because yeah, I mean, having a garden is definitely there's no shortage of work that needs to be done, and care and love that need to go into the plants. What is your favorite place to enjoy nature?
Well, there's another easy one. That's out on the surf, the place I can be truly disconnected and ever changing. Whenever every time I'm out there, it's different.
Yeah, every time I've gone surfing, I feel like there's like a distinct moment where, you get past that excitement of, paddling out into the surf, catching your first few waves, and you sit in the lineup for a sec. And there's like, for me at least, there's always this moment where you just sit and you go, wow, this is really cool. Like this place, the way it feels, the water. I mean, you just feel like such a connection with nature. And I don't know if that's the same for you, but I always found like through surfing, that was always a huge thing for me.
Yep, it certainly is. So long as you're not bumping up against some locals who don't want you there in their local break.
That
But
is,
no, it's amazing. You're sitting there and you see a school of dolphins zip by. It's pretty magical.
we talked about this a little bit, but why is sustainable living, or why is sustainability and important in the bigger scope of our earth and just how we live our lives? Why is it so important that the homes that we live in, the vegetables that we grow or fruits that we grow, why is that so important as a global community?
Well, I think one, just selfishly, they're just better. The green homes are just better designed homes and more comfortable to be in. Organic, local produce just tastes better. But of course, it's also better for the people who grow and make it. It's funny. In terms of the earth, the planet will be here, whatever. It's just whether we will be,
Hmm.
and where we will be on this planet. That's that's the big question.
Well, yeah, thanks for taking the time to hop on and talk on the podcast. I'm sure like everybody learned a lot, especially from the investment side, and then, even just learning about your story of, honestly just starting in the tech and the software, but also having like a deep rooted connection with growing and earth and being out there and surfing. I think it's a really great thing that people were able to learn a lot.
Great. Happy to have had the conversation, and I'll send you a few links to put in the show notes.
That sounds good. Thanks for listening to this episode of Sustainable Goat. David has so much really good information and knowledge. It was so great to have a conversation with him. Anything that we talked about, details on some of the companies, stuff like that, they'll all be in the show notes, so definitely check those out. And if you want to connect with David, that information will be in the show notes as well. Thanks again for listening to this episode of Sustainable Goat.